G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. As most of you guys know, I just finished hiking tee-are-a-rho-a over in New Zealand and it was absolutely incredible. In saying that, it definitely wasn't easy and there was a lot of planning and preparation in the lead up to the hike, as well as a lot to think about while I was on the trail itself. In this video, I'm going to share 30 tips for preparing and walking the long pathway, tee-are-a-rho-a. Alright, first up is pronunciation of the trail name. Now this was a contentious subject for me. I was posting daily reels over on Instagram as I was hiking the trail and my pronunciation was terrible at first. But as I spent more time in New Zealand and chatted to more locals, as well as getting a few helpful messages on social media for my pronunciation, I did improve. So the way to say tee-are-a-rho-a is T, and you got to roll your R's. Araroa, Araroa, tee-are-a-rho-a. I started off by saying tee-are-a-rho-a or tee-are-a-rho-a. I am about to start hiking the tee-are-a-rho-a. 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 But it's tee-are-a-rho-a. And I don't think most New Zealand locals will expect you to get it first try, but definitely is important to some of the Maori people in New Zealand that you at least attempt to say the words correctly, so you can get a bit of practice in before you head over. Secondly, I want to talk about the route. Tee-are-a-rho-a is, to put simply, a very long trail. It's made up of a multitude of smaller trails that are either linked directly to each other or are linked by roads or farm tracks. It's not a continuous trail. There's sections of road walking, there's sections that you'll have to take a car, there's a section where you'll have to cross the Cook Strait on a ferry, and so you'll have to think about a lot more than just walking when you're on the trail. You're definitely going to want to research the trail and the route before you go as much as possible, and also have some adequate navigation tools while you're on the trail itself. The tee-are-a-rho-a website has all the information you'll need on the route, and the apps I used for navigation were Far Out, as well as the official tee-are-a-rho-a app. If you're not a Kiwi and you don't live in New Zealand, then you'll also have to think about travel and potentially visas as well. I won't go into too much detail here because everyone's situation is different, but you'll most likely have to fly into the country. And if you're starting north, you're going to want to fly into Auckland and either hitchhike or take a bus up to Cape Reinga. And if you want to start on the south end like I did, I found the best way was to fly into Queenstown and then take a bus or hitchhike down to Bluff from there. I didn't have to worry about visas as an Aussie, but I know that New Zealand does require citizens of most countries to have a visa of some sort, so make sure you look into what applies to you specifically and sort that out before you head over. All right, let's talk about gear a little bit. You're definitely going to want to invest into some proper trekking gear for tee-are-a-rho-a. New Zealand weather and the trails along the track can be very unpredictable, pretty hectic at times, and you're going to want to be prepared for pretty much any situation. If you want to check out my gear list, that'll be in the description below, but you're going to want to bring a tent on tee-are-a-rho-a. That is pretty much a necessity, as well as a pretty warm sleep setup and some warm clothes because it can get very cold at times. You're going to want some water purification gear because you'll be drinking out of streams and lakes pretty often, as well as a decent little cooking setup because you'll often be in the backcountry for days at a time. Next up, let's talk about your fitness. Tee-are-a-rho-a is a really hard hike, and while I have heard of people jumping onto the trail without too much hiking experience before, I definitely recommend training a little bit in the lead up to your hike. You'll want to get your body used to the demands of being on trail day after day, especially carrying a heavy pack. So I recommend getting out onto some multi-day hikes before you head onto tee-are-a-rho-a with a heavy pack. Test out all your gear, climb up some hills, anything just to get your body used to the demands that you're going to experience on trail. A simple way to get your legs ready for hiking is just to up your daily step count throughout the day. I like to aim for 20,000 plus steps every day, especially in the weeks and months leading up to a big hike. Most people can easily add in a few thousand steps a day by walking around on your lunch break or going for a morning walk before work, and that'll really help your muscles, your ligaments, your joints get ready for hiking all day, every day. Physical fitness is important, but so is your mental preparedness, and that's something that I found was really impactful for me on tee-are-a-rho-a. A hike like TA is just as much a mental test as it is physical. Especially if you're planning to hike the trail yourself, make sure you're comfortable being alone for extended periods of time and are capable of looking after yourself even when you're completely isolated. It's not uncommon to see very few people across multiple days of hiking, so if you're not comfortable being alone or seeing very few people, then I would work on that before heading onto the trail. Even if you're hiking with a group of people and loneliness won't be an issue, it is important to set expectations for yourself that are realistic as to not push past your limits and exert yourself too much. There will undoubtedly be many tough days on tee-are-a-rho-a, and having some mental resilience is going to help you push through those tough days when no one else is really there to help you. Once again, just testing yourself on some tough multi-day hikes before you head over to tee-are-a-rho-a is going to be really useful for your mental resilience as well as your physical fitness. So there are many useful resources that I found super helpful in the lead up as well as on the trail itself. For planning your trek, you can't go past the official tee-are-a-rho-a website. It's full of incredibly useful information about the route. It's got trail notes, information on trail closures, and basically anything else you can think of. I'd recommend going through the entire tee-are-a-rho-a website before you head onto the trail. Read all the pages, take in all the information. It is really useful stuff, and obviously the tee-are-a-rho-a Trust know what they're talking about. Another resource that I found useful specifically for resupply and food drops was this article by Bike Hike Safari. It has detailed information on all the towns, all the places you can get groceries and resupply, gas, first aid, and other essentials, as well as the best place to send food parcels ahead on the trail. For navigation, I primarily use the Far Out app. In my opinion, it is the best app for through hiking and was really good for me on tee-are-a-rho-a. The community comments, as well as the up-to-date, for the most part, trail information is an absolute necessity while you're out there. I also had the official tee-are-a-rho-a app, which was also useful at times. It has trail notes as well as a route on there, but I did find Far Out to be a bit easier to use, so for the most part I used that. I also had NZ Topo 50, another app which shows all the camping huts around tee-are-a-rho-a as well as pretty much every single trail including tee-are-a-rho-a, which was useful for planning different side routes, detours, and that kind of thing. There are also some great community resources for the trail, including the official tee-are-a-rho-a Facebook group. You can ask your questions in there, or you can search for other people's questions and answers. There's a wealth of knowledge from people that have hiked the trail or people that live on the trail, and I highly recommend going and joining that Facebook group. There's also a Facebook group for trail angels, which gives you easy access to communication with the trail angels, as well as being a good place to ask questions about trail angels further along on the trail. There's also usually a couple of WhatsApp groups for each season of hikers on tee-are-a-rho-a. I joined up the Nobo group when I hiked it last season as I was heading Nobo, and it was cool to sort of talk to people that were ahead and behind me on trail, and also easily organize like rendezvous with other hikers, which was pretty sick. Another great resource to learn about tee-are-a-rho-a and be inspired is content creators. There's some awesome YouTubers out there, some awesome Instagrammers and bloggers, and I'll list a few of my favorites in the description below, but you'll get a wealth of knowledge from people firsthand, as well as some inspiration watching other people who have hiked before you. All right, let's talk logistics. First up, we'll talk about costs. Now, the cost is going to be different from everyone. For me, tee-are-a-rho-a cost about $6,000 all up. I didn't track everything specifically down to the dollar, but that's just a rough estimate, not taking into account any of my sponsored gear. It can definitely be done a lot cheaper or a lot more expensive, depending on the food you eat, what accommodation you choose, and how fast you're walking. But I'd say between 5,000 and 7,000 is probably about the average for most hikers. Resupply is very important on tee-are-a-rho-a, especially the South Island, where towns are few and far between. Make sure you do your research before heading over on when you plan to restock and resupply food, where your food drops are going to be, because you don't want to be in the middle of the backcountry and run out of food. You'll almost certainly need to send food parcels ahead of you on the trail. I think I sent out 3 or 4 parcels on the South Island, none on the north, as there is a lot more population towns and roads, but the South Island specifically, I sent food parcels ahead, and that website that I mentioned earlier, Bike Hike Safari, has an awesome article detailing the best and most common spots to send food ahead. So go check that out to help you plan, and I will obviously drop the link below in the description as well. Transport. You might not think you'd have to worry too much about transport on a hiking trail, but tee-are-a-rho-a is very unique. Apart from needing to find transport to the trail terminus itself, you'll also be needing to find car transport, ferry transport along the track at various points, as well as hire a canoe for the Wanganui River section on the North Island. Some major examples of motor transport needed are the Rakaia and Rangitata rivers on the South Island. You'll need to find a ride around these rivers as it is quite dangerous to attempt to cross them. Whether it's a hitchhike or organising a shuttle, that's an absolute necessity. You'll also need to organise your ferry ride across the Cook Strait when you're switching between islands, and there are also a bunch of other ferry rides along both islands as well. Hitchhiking is another popular form of transport for hikers along the trail and can be really helpful for getting into towns that are just off track to resupply or spend a night off trail. I'd never hitchhiked before I went to New Zealand and hiked TA, so it was a bit daunting for me, but I found that every time I put my thumb out, locals were more than willing to pick me up, take me into town. Such friendly people, the Kiwis, and you shouldn't have too much problems hitchhiking at all. Information and more details on all these transport methods can be found on the tee-are-a-rho-a website, as well as the tee-are-a-rho-a Facebook group. All right, let's move on to accommodation. Backcountry huts will be your primary source of accommodation on the South Island and do require a backcountry hut pass, so make sure you purchase that before heading onto trail. You can also usually camp at these huts as well as other designated campsites along the trek. Wild camping is generally not permitted on tee-are-a-rho-a, but I will admit there was a few times where I did wild camp, usually because I miscalculated how long it would take to get to a hut for the night and I was forced to just set up camp where I was. Please try avoid wild camping at all costs, but if you do have to do it, leave no trace and make as little impact as possible. You'll also be able to stay in the various towns along the trek. On the North Island, this is going to be a lot more common with more population, roads and towns. You can stay at hotels, hostels and holiday parks, and prices will vary across both islands but are usually pretty affordable. While there are no specific permits needed to hike tee-are-a-rho-a as a whole, it is important to register yourself as a hiker on the tee-are-a-rho-a website before commencing your walk. Your registration helps the tee-are-a-rho-a Trust to track hiker numbers, as well as gives you access to important safety information and trail closures. While you're registering, it's also a good opportunity to make your optional donation to the tee-are-a-rho-a Trust. All right, let's talk about hiking season and which direction to take. The New Zealand hiking season typically runs from about October to April, and most TA walkers choose to start their hike in the north around October or November. This ensures the best weather along the entire trek as you'll reach the colder and more dangerous South Island during the hotter months of the year. The South Island is definitely the more treacherous and remote half of tee-are-a-rho-a, so hiking here during the best weather is ideal. When I hiked tee-are-a-rho-a, I actually started from the south end a lot later into the season. For me, starting around March just worked better for my schedule, and if you are starting later into the season, I'll definitely recommend starting south and heading north. This ensures that you will walk the South Island before it gets too cold, and you'll reach the North Island where it's generally warmer and the weather is a bit more mild during autumn and into winter. So how long will walking tee-are-a-rho-a take? The tee-are-a-rho-a Trust recommends 50 to 80 days per island, so about 160 days max for the entire trail. This will obviously depend heavily on your walking pace, how many rest days you take, and how much of the trail you choose to walk. For context, I walked about 2,200 kilometers of tee-are-a-rho-a, skipping most of the road sections, and it took me about 61 days of walking. I was walking relatively fast and probably a bit quicker than the average hiker though. I get a lot of questions about the trail conditions, and to be brutally honest, a lot of tee-are-a-rho-a is pretty rough. While the trail is well marked for almost 100% of the route, it definitely can get pretty overgrown and technical in some sections. Sometimes the trail markers can lead you off course, or sometimes there can be multiple routes on the trail and it can get a little bit confusing to navigate. Be prepared to use your map or navigation app in some sections where it is definitely possible to get lost. The trail is also ungraded in most sections, which makes things quite tedious and slow at times. It's not like some other through hikes you may have walked, like the Pacific Crest Trail or the Bibbleman Track, where for the most part you could ride a bike along the trail. Tee-are-a-rho-a is absolutely brutal in parts and definitely requires some experience and some training on more technical sections. You'll also want to be aware of trail closures, of which there are usually a few each season. Be prepared to detour or skip a section of the trail if it is closed for whatever reason. The terrain on Tee-are-a-rho-a is also very diverse and sometimes pretty hectic. There's easy, flat, tussock field walking, and there's also exposed technical alpine regions. There's plenty of remote backcountry regions where there won't be any help for days, so it's important that you're comfortable hiking on rough terrain by yourself without any assistance. The weather can also be an added challenge, especially in some of the alpine regions on the South Island. The weather can change fast in parts and can be quite extreme as well. I personally experienced some blizzards, some crazy snow and freezing temperatures on multiple occasions on Tee-are-a-rho-a. Make sure to always stay informed about the trail conditions as well as the weather in parts of the trail that you're about to walk. If it's going to be too dangerous or risky to walk in a specific section, be prepared to delay, stay in town for a couple extra days, or potentially detour around that section if you don't have the time. All right, speaking of unsafe conditions, let's talk a little bit about safety. As with any hike, it is important to make sure someone knows about your intentions on the trail. If you're heading out into a backcountry section with no reception, make sure you tell somebody where you're going to be, where you're planning to be each night that you'll be out there, and when your intended time to finish is. This is especially important if you're hiking alone like I was. I would always make sure that my partner and some of my family knew where I'd be in New Zealand at any point in time, which campsites I would be at, and my estimated time out of each section. You'll also want to carry a personal locator beacon of some sort. I met many hikers in New Zealand that weren't carrying a PLB, which is a scary thought considering some of the terrain and the conditions that you'll experience. Unfortunately, it is very easy to get injured on the trail. People have died, and if you have a PLB, some way to communicate in an emergency, it can potentially save your life. You'll also want to bring a first aid kit of some kind, as you would on any expedition, but especially important on Tee-are-a-rho-a, which is obviously very long and potentially dangerous. In my first aid kit, I carried a bandage, some band-aids, some kinesiology tape, antiseptic cream, and various other bits and pieces to make sure that I was safe and able to tend to any wounds that I got while out on the trail. All right, now that we're safe, let's talk about respecting the trail itself. Most of you guys know about the leave no trace principles, but it is especially important in the fragile ecosystems of New Zealand. If you need to use the bathroom and don't have access to a toilet at one of the huts or towns, make sure you are doing your business well away from the trail, well away from water sources, and make sure you dig in a hole if you want to take a number 2. Burying it deep and not leaving toilet paper all over the backcountry. Also, make sure you're taking out all your trash with you. That includes food scraps. Don't go leaving pieces of plastic or food waste or anything that you brought in out in the natural environment. It's not meant to be there. Take it out with you and dispose of it in towns. It's also a good idea to learn a bit about the specific delicate ecosystems that make up New Zealand. There are fragile alpine, coastal and forest regions all across New Zealand, and it's important to respect and take care of the environment in every way possible. Make sure to research and understand the specific guidelines for each region across New Zealand. Look after the native flora and fauna, some of which are quite rare and close to being extinct, and hopefully we can make sure the trail is enjoyed by future hikers and future generations in years to come. You'll also probably notice a lot of trapping along the trail. New Zealand has a bunch of invasive species, and they are going pretty hard at the moment to try and eradicate a lot of them. There'll be traps that are sometimes baited with poison along the trail, so just make sure to stay away from those. Obviously don't touch them, and if the traps are right next to a water source, it might not be the best idea to drink from that source. Tee-are-a-rho-a also passes through many significant places to the Maori people. Show respect by familiarizing yourself with the local customs and history. While on the trail, it's important to also support local businesses along the route. There are heaps of small businesses and individuals along the trail that are specifically there to cater to tee-are-a-rho-a walkers. There are also so many trail angels that offer their services, whether it's bed for the night, whether it's a meal or transportation, usually completely for free along the trail. If you do decide to use a trail angel service, there is a custom in New Zealand called koha, which simply means gift, and it is usually a pretty good idea to offer something in return for their service, whether it's money, food, or anything really. As with a lot of other through hikes, there is a big sense of community on the trail. There'll often be thousands of walkers on tee-are-a-rho-a at any single time, and you'll chat with hikers most days on the trail. I was completely alone on tee-are-a-rho-a, so I always relished conversation with other hikers, sharing stories from the trail, sharing trail conditions further along in each direction, and it was some of my favorite moments on the trek. It's definitely not a necessity to talk to anyone. I mean, I'm the biggest introvert, so oftentimes I would actively avoid people, but it is still really beneficial for both you and other hikers to engage in the trail community. All right, that's pretty much everything you need to know for planning, preparing, and hiking the trail. And I just want to say, savor the journey. Tee-are-a-rho-a offers incredible vistas, diverse landscapes, and unique experiences. Take the time to immerse yourself in the beauty of New Zealand's wilderness and enjoy every step. And this is not for everyone, but I think it is really valuable to document your journey. I recorded my entire trip, and while I did share it with people on social media to hopefully provide some inspiration to get out into the wilderness, I also did it so I can look back at the incredible journey that I undertook. Maybe you like taking photos or writing blog posts. Whatever it is, I implore you to document and record your journey so that you can look back on and reminisce on all the good times had. All right, that is it for today. 30 tips for hiking tee-are-a-rho-a, preparation, the trail itself, and everything in between. I hope you have the best time on your tee-are-a-rho-a hike, just as I did this past season. If you found value in this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future content. There are plenty more adventures coming your way here on YouTube. If you wanted to support me further, I do have a Patreon account where you can access behind the scenes, group trips, and heaps of other perks. You can check that out in the description below. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Cheers.